Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. The final days of June has us ready for a big second half of 2024, just days ahead. So let's get cracking, as there's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and everything in between when it comes to the sports landscape, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who have been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And think about it, we're just a week from now, the 4th of July, Independence Day. It's already been exactly a month since Memorial Day, a week since the beginning of summer. Can we put the pause on what is taking place here? Because I feel like in a blink of an eye, we're going to be talking about NFL training camps, and before you know it, college football and the NFL season, and I do not want summer to go anywhere. Now, of course, that's wishful thinking. We know time's going to fly, but the bottom line and the moral of it all is that stay in the moment, people. Stay present. Don't look too far ahead. Yes, I can talk about 4th of July next week. July's on Monday, a new month, etc. But I just have to announce to everybody that, yes, although we are in the middle of summer and it's just pretty much getting started, but always stay in the present, stay in the moment, enjoy now, because as much as we want to look ahead, and certainly we do not want to look behind, stay right here. And I'm glad that you guys and gals are here, whether watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast platform. So let's get right to it. Enough of the philosophies and my perspectives on life and things of that nature. I want to put a lid on the NHL season. I know that the draft is tomorrow night, and this is draft week when you think about it. I'll get to the NBA a little bit later on, as well as what's happening in baseball and break up the Mets. Can you believe it? But the Stanley Cup Final, Game 7, I know I talked about it the other day being the biggest game in the history of the sport, considering everything that we discussed on Monday. Edmonton down 0-3, coming all the way back, Game 7 Monday night. And it didn't live up to the billing. It started off great, considering that the Florida Panthers scored the first goal of the game, and they needed that first goal, as we talked about. And then just 2.5 minutes later, Mattias Janmark got the game-tying goal on a breakaway where Sergei Bobrovsky should have stopped that goal. It went right between the armpit there and up to the top of the net where the game was tied. And because it was freewheeling and fast and loose there in that first period, you thought to yourself, or at least I did, that this is going to be a barn burner. This could be a 3-3 game in the third period, to where it could either come down to the final few minutes or even go into overtime, which would have made it an instant classic. But you didn't get that, because in the second period, there seemed to be a little bit of a lull, although the Panthers did get the go-ahead and game-winning goal by Sam Reinhart, where an opportunity by the Edmonton Oilers on the other side of the ice squirted right through the crease. And how many times have you seen that, where a team comes this close to scoring, whether it be a game-tying or a go-ahead goal, and then the other way, this is where the Panthers came down, and Sam Reinhart there on the right wing, right above the face-off circle, took a shot and squeezed it right between the goalpost and the goaltender, Stuart Skinner, which was a bad goal. He should have came out a little bit more to attack that angle. And I know that the play was developing, and you could talk about the defenseman. Maybe there was a bit of a screen, and certainly did not go on the attack to make sure that Reinhart wasn't going to get that shot off. But Skinner should have stopped that puck. Should have been a scenario where the game would have been tied. But as it was, of course, the game was now in the hands of the Panthers, up 2-1. And when you get into the third period, you really look at it from the 7-minute point on to the end of the game, where the Panthers hung on for dear life. And that's all there is to it. The Oilers had plenty of opportunities, plenty of cracks at it. You had that big opportunity where Connor McDavid was right in front of the net, where the puck seemed to find him, and he had a wide open point blank shot to the point where it just slid off of his stick to the left side or the right side of Sergei Bobrovsky. You had Zach Hyman. You had a bunch of players there scrambling in front of the net, trying to get the puck through the goal line, and didn't happen there. You had a couple of other opportunities where they were flirting with a tie game there late, and they were unable to cash in. You did have a moment where the Panthers were able to try to at least maybe push the game to 3-1, and they had a little bit of a flurry, but it was all Edmonton in the Panthers zone, and this is even coming after a power play there, which I believe it was in the latter part of the second period, so I'm way ahead of myself. That was the trip, which shouldn't have been called, Matthew Tkachuk, where he went sprawling, and then next thing you know, he had an Edmonton Oilers player trip over him. Certainly was not done on purpose, no intent there, but they gave the Oilers a power play. And even with the opportunity that the Oilers had there, but even more so later on in the third period, where they were trying their damnedest, double shifting both Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and even in the final few seconds where we've seen throughout the course of this postseason where the Panthers want to freeze the puck, that old play where it used to be whistled back in the day, but they did away with that rule. And you just knew that once the puck was in the corner, they were not going to give the Oilers an opportunity, which I hated. And I get it. They're trying to just get to zero. They're doing whatever it takes as the clock certainly wasn't their friend over those final 7 minutes. And knowing that the Oilers had opportunity after opportunity, pulling the goalie there, which I thought was at the right time. And think about it. Usually they pull the goalie with about 2 minutes left to give them ample time. I thought a minute and a half, it's a 2-1 game. You don't want to just all of a sudden have an opportunity to where, let's say the Panthers scored with 1:40 to go and it's 3-1, you could pretty much turn the lights off of that game. But the Oilers, they weren't able to get Skinner out of the net until I believe about 1:15 left, maybe even a little bit less than that. And although they had a couple of opportunities, none better than the McDavid one there a few minutes prior, and the Panthers were able to do their best to freeze the puck there in the corner to the left of Sergei Bobrovsky. Time expires, gloves, sticks, everything goes flying in the air. Connor McDavid with his stick on his knees skating to the Oiler bench. And a very anticlimactic, good game, not a great game, far from a classic Game 7. Everything that we hoped for, everything that we desired as sports fans, knowing that the magnitude and the enormity, especially on the Florida Panthers side, that if they would have lost that game, they would have been a part of history, and who knows if they would have been able to recover. Going to a Stanley Cup last year and having a 3-0 series lead to just spit the bid and lose the final 4 games, obviously they don't have to worry about that. They could go into the offseason and to their parade, which I'll get to in a second, as champions for the first time in the franchise's history. And what could you say? Carter Verhaeghe got the first goal of the game, which he had done nothing in the series other than Game 1. And there were a lot of guys that had to step up and show up to see whether or not that they were going to not shrink in the big moment. Reinhart, of course, had the big goal there, as we saw. And Sergei Bobrovsky made big saves during that final 7-minute stretch. He wasn't spectacular by any stretch. He did give up the one goal, as I mentioned, just minutes after Verhaeghe got the game started with the opening goal. But he made the stops when he needed to, when the money was on the line and they had to deliver, or he had to deliver and bring them home to a Stanley Cup championship. He did that, so you can't knock him. He now has a Stanley Cup championship as well as 2 Vezinas, and I believe he's up for the Vezina this year. The guy's probably going to go to the Hall of Fame, and certainly erases any doubt about a guy who has the hardware to boot individually and certainly needed to get that Stanley Cup championship to cement his legacy. And I'm not trying to make him out to be the Andrei Vasilevskis or the Billy Smiths or Grant Fuhrs or the Dominic Haseks of the world. But again, knowing that he has made it to the mountaintop, chances are he's probably going to be a Hall of Famer when it's all said and done. And you know that there was a bunch of relief there during the post-game with Matthew Tkachuk, having his father there, Keith Tkachuk, the longtime NHLer, St. Louis Blues, etc. His brother Brady was there. The GM, Bill Zito, you could just see it in his face, not only just the relief, but also the euphoria, the tears, the team, the way that it was built, what they went through the last 2 years, and now they're champions. And give it up. The Panthers certainly showed their mettle. They certainly showed that they were capable of doing this, despite the fact that they put themselves in a position where if they would have lost, it would have been the biggest choke job in the history of any final. Now, we could talk about the Yankees and Red Sox, but remember, that was a championship series. And as bad as that loss was for the Yankees, and of course, that is one that will be remembered forever, but it wasn't in a setting where it was for a championship, where if the Panthers lost, forget about it. They would have been superseded the Yankees, considering nobody remembers the 1942 Detroit Red Wings for losing that series to the Toronto Maple Leafs when they were up 3-0 and the Maple Leafs won 4 in a row. That was a long time ago. There aren't many people around that even remembered it or witnessed it, so this really would have been just a black mark on the franchise, on the team. Who knows what would have happened? Not to say they would have broken the team up or fired the coach or anything like that, but still, this would have been the longest offseason probably in sports history as to what to do with a team that went to a cup final last year, was up 3-0, and then lost the final. Obviously, we don't have to talk about it. It's all moot, but that certainly would have been just fascinating from so many levels going into this offseason as to how that would have taken place. Now, before I get to the parade, let me get to Edmonton because I was rooting hard for them. I know that city rallied around this team. We saw what happened there in Game 6 with the crowd and people outside of the arena with the big scoreboard, the big screen. And you had a lot of Edmonton Oilers fans, whether they were from Edmonton or maybe just fans of the team, flocking down, whether it was north of the border or maybe whatever Edmonton fans that are here in the States or even in the state of Florida for that matter. But boy, there was a big contingent there. You heard that when Janmark scored the goal to tie the game. And I thought to myself, geez, if the Oilers get in front or if this is going to end up being a shootout, that fan base or the fans that were in that building were certainly going to be heard from. And pretty much I had nothing to cheer for after that Janmark goal there halfway through the first period. But for the team itself, I felt bad for McDavid. He was despondent as the MVP, the Conn Smythe Trophy winner, and he was deserving of it. Who are you going to give it to? Bobrovsky did not have 3 good games from 4, 5, and 6. Gave up what? Didn't give up 18 goals. Remember, he got pulled in game number 4, but you couldn't give it to him. There wasn't any other guy on that team, whether it would be Alexander Barkov, maybe you could have given it to him. But as you saw, McDavid had a just astounding postseason, record number of assists throughout the course of the postseason, and had, 42 points. Now, the final 2 games, he didn't score a point, did not register a goal or an assist. I get it that they won Game 6, so they didn't really need him. And although he had that one spot, and who knows, he probably hasn't slept since he was in front of Bobrovsky, knowing that he could have slammed that puck home, didn't have a wide open net, but certainly had an opportunity to bank that in. And for McDavid, I know all of the haters and the naysayers calling him Mick overrated and just killing him. And listen, I mentioned on my YouTube channel, does he take a bit of a hit here? It's tough to knock this guy considering what he's done for the sport, what he means to the sport. But him not showing up there in a Game 7, despite the fact that he tried, and I understand that he was gassed toward the end of that game, and Leon Draisaitl may have been compromised. I don't want to hear it. If you're playing, if you're out on the ice, and even if you're skating on one leg, if you're out there, that means you're trying and you're giving it your all. And if you fall short, you fall short. You would have been a conquering hero if you scored a goal on one leg or whatever bumps, bruises, fractures that you may have. But because you didn't deliver, that's going to stick to you until next season, because whether you are Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl, who only had, a couple of assists in the series and didn't register a goal at all, at least McDavid put them to a point where they dragged them back to Alberta with back-to-back 4-point performances in games 4 and 5. And yes, I get it. It's a what have you done for me lately? What did he do in Game 6? No points, but Edmonton won. And then obviously Game 7 was blanked on the score sheet. But McDavid, he could play on my team any day. You could call him Mick overrated all you want. And that's a little bit unfair, but he does take a bit of a hit here because as much as he tried and gave it his all and left everything on that Sunrise ice, he was unable to get the game-tying goal and therefore was unable to get an opportunity to see if they could have won a Stanley Cup. So McDavid does take a bit of a hit here, and that's going to be on his, not only his playoff resume, but that's going to be a part of his legacy until he wins one. And when he wins one, does it erase? Absolutely not, but certainly it will at least quell himself, the team, his fan base, knowing that if he does get to the mountaintop at some point throughout the rest of his career, then that would be not widely forgotten, but at least that could be put to rest, knowing that he exercised that demon of a Game 7 not being able to capitalize. So for Edmonton, let's see what's going to happen. They do need to make some changes there. They need to have a little bit more of a defensive approach. We know about their offensive firepower. We've talked about it here over the last 2 months and even before that. But for Chris Knobloch, the coach, just a phenomenal job. What he had to do coming into a team that was 3-9-1, had those 2 big winning streaks throughout the course of the regular season. Obviously, what he did in the postseason, down 3-2 to Vancouver in the conference semifinal and then getting to a Game 7 down 0-3. I mean, what more can you say about the job that he has done throughout this season and postseason? And hopefully this is something that they can build on. And you would think that the experience, everything that has led up to this point, who knows? Could they be the Florida Panthers next year, knowing that the Panthers went to a cup last year and lost, and then obviously win it this time around? And then for Edmonton, can they do the same? Can they follow that same blueprint of getting back to a final and sealing the deal there next year? Who knows if they're going to be the favorite? You have a lot of good teams there out in the West. We saw what Dallas did throughout the course of the regular season, even though Edmonton disposed of them in a conference final. You would think that Vancouver's going to come back. Colorado, you know they're going to be a force. Maybe a scenario where you could have another team that could rise, whether it is Winnipeg, who had a very good regular season, but certainly flickered in the postseason, losing in 5 to Colorado in the first round. And then how could you forget maybe even the Vegas Golden Knights? Can they regroup and restructure their team a little bit to get back to a deep Stanley Cup playoff run and maybe even get back to the final round as they did last year and winning the whole thing? So the West is going to be strong, and we know about the East with the Rangers and Panthers and Bruins, and let's see what the Hurricanes are going to do. And is there another team that could be on the come up? We'll have to wait and see. But that is it. That is your Stanley Cup final. I wish I could add a little bit more. But one last thing before I pivot. So the Florida Panthers are winning the cup. You think, all right, when is the parade? You know it's going to be hot. It's going to be sweltering. I'm sure there's going to be a throng of Panther fans, the 30,000 of them. Of course, I'm kidding. But you know that they've been waiting a long time, 30 years as a franchise to win their first Stanley Cup. And it could be 1,000 degrees out there, but you know whomever is part of that fan base, they'll be down there to represent. But at first glance, I thought to myself, well, I guess the parade maybe would be Thursday, and then possibly Friday is what I thought, only because I looked at the Celtics. They won a Game 5 in their building last Monday night, and the parade wasn't until Friday. Why did they have to wait 4 days for the parade? All right, fine. It's the end of the week. No problem. So you must be thinking, when is the Panther parade? It's got to be today, right? It's a Thursday. No, not at all. All right, maybe they're doing the same thing as the Celtics. It's going to be tomorrow down there on the Fort Lauderdale Strip, where it's going to go past the hotels and all the bars and restaurants and even the Elbow Room, which you saw. I don't know if you had seen the video or the photographs of Matt Tkachuk going down to the Elbow Room, the famed bar there on the corner of Las Olas Boulevard in Fort Lauderdale, where he had the denizens and the people who happened to be there at that time sipping out of the cup, having the public out there touch it, drink out of it, and just celebrate there literally hours after the Panthers won the Stanley Cup. So that's where the parade route is going to be. But yeah, is it going to be Friday, 11 o'clock? It is going to be Sunday. Are you serious? They're going to wait almost a whole week before you have the parade? Why not have it on the 4th of July? Or maybe why not have it on the eve of training camp? Why they wait 6 days for a parade is beyond me. And I don't know what's happening in Fort Lauderdale. I don't know if there's a convention. I don't know what's going on. Maybe that's the case. That's the reason why they had to push it to Sunday. But really, a Sunday? I don't think there's been any parade in the history of all these celebrations, whether it's a Super Bowl, NBA championship, Major League Baseball. I don't recall of a parade celebration being on a weekend, let alone a Sunday. So it's like you get up, you go to church, you thank your lucky stars and count your blessings and also say thank you, Lord, or the hockey gods for the Panthers to win this championship. And now I got to go watch them celebrate down Fort Lauderdale during the parade. Doesn't make any sense. I found that odd. I don't understand why they didn't make it today or tomorrow, and there must be something going on. It has to be. But there you go. That is your 2024 Stanley Cup Final. And you have the draft starting tomorrow night. And I don't know, maybe they didn't want it to interfere with the draft. I mean, really, it's going to be in the morning. Why would that be an issue where the parade, something has to be going on in Florida for them to move it up or move it to Sunday. So that's what you have there. But as far as the NHL draft, now I can't really get into the particulars. It's similar to the NBA draft, although it's only 2 rounds for the NBA draft and the NHL draft. Obviously, it's a lot longer than that. So they're going to have, I believe, the first couple of rounds tomorrow night and then the rest of them there on Saturday. But I can't really give you a full in-depth analysis or breakdown as to who are the top players, whether it's the top defensemen, top, etc. I know the one player that is going to be picked, and I believe San Jose does have the first overall pick of the draft tomorrow night. I don't even know where it's held. It may be in Vegas for all I know. Who knows? But Macklin Celebrini is the guy that will be, in all likelihood, drafted number 1 overall. And I don't know if he's going to be a generational type player a la Connor Bedard last year when he got drafted by the Chicago Blackhawks. I know, obviously, if you're going to be drafted number 1, you would think you're going to be an impact type player, a guy that is going to be on the team for at least a decade and a half in uniform, maybe longer with health, obviously playing a factor into that. But for a guy like Celebrini, who's a forward, and you would think he's going to make immediate impact on a San Jose team who obviously was very awful. And let me just double check what the draft analysis or draft order is going to be, because here I am talking San Jose, and I believe they did win the lottery. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself to think that, oh yeah, they are going to be the team that is going to draft number 1. But let's just double check that NHL draft order as I do this on the fly. But for Celebrini, let's see if he's going to be a guy that is going to come right in and all of a sudden make that impact to be a guy that is going to take his team to big-time heights. A guy, and yes, it is going to be in Vegas. So let's see if the San Jose Sharks, who you would think will go ahead and pick them, and yes, they are going to be, hold on. Yes, the San Jose Sharks will have the top pick in the draft, and for whatever reason, I feel like I'm reading this wrong, but we will see Celebrini, a guy that I'm sure will come ballyhooed and maybe not with a lot of the fanfare that Bedard had received last year. So we'll take a look at that and recap that on Monday there for the San Jose Sharks in the NHL draft. And I'm reading this here about Perry Berezin. Is that right? Oh no, Sergei Berezin. Died 7 seasons in the NHL. I thought it was Perry. I know it was a former Maple Leaf. Sergei, that is. I know Perry was a guy that played for the Flames back in the 80s, but that's some sad news as I just pull this up here. Sergei Berezin, don't know the details as far as his death, but thoughts, prayers, and condolences go out to his family. He retired after the 02-03 season, so he played there in the mid-90s. So some sad news there, dying at the age of 52. All right, now I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to go to the hardwood. I will get to the baseball in a second because obviously you had the NBA draft there last night, and not a lot of fanfare there because it's not as if you had a generational player last year a la Victor Wembanyama come out or have a handful of players that could make an immediate impact on their teams when we're looking at the top of the draft, in this case the Atlanta Hawks, who drafted Zachary Risacher. You know me with these names, people. Number 1 overall, 7-footer from France. So maybe hoping that they'll get a little bit of that Wembanyama magic. Of course, has the height 4 inches shorter than Wembanyama, but there are some belief that maybe the Hawks with Trae Young and even with his backcourt mate DeJounte Murray, although there have been rumors abound, maybe they'll trade one of those 2 guys, and a lot could happen here over the course of the next week or so with free agency opening up technically on Sunday, but really July 1st, which will be Monday. So a lot to be said there with Young, Murray, etc. But they got their big man, and let's see Risacher, who I've never seen play before, didn't go to the YouTube highlight reels or anything like that, because to me, you can only get so much on highlight reels. You have to watch game footage just to get a feel for how he plays, because putback dunks, alley-oops, turnaround jumpers, and things of that nature, anybody can put together a highlight reel, which is going to make a player like that look like a future Hall of Famer. So I can't just base it on that. But for the Hawks to draft that guy, and let's see, does he have any promise? You would think if he's going to get drafted number 1, but we've seen guys number 1 in the past, whether your name is Michael Olowokandi with the Clippers back in 98, or do I even need to bring up Anthony Bennett in the 2013 draft from the Cleveland Cavaliers? Those are guys that certainly did not put their fingerprints or make their stamp as being former number 1 overall draft picks as far as having any length in their NBA career or anything worth an NBA career. In particular, Bennett, what was he in the league? 3-4 years before he went off into oblivion. And Olowokandi, I know he bounced around, went to the Celtics and had a decent career, but for a guy who was a 7-footer, number 1 overall pick there, 26 years ago, certainly did not have the type of career that a lot of people would thought. And even you take a guy like Kenyon Martin, who had a very good, well, I would say very good, that may be strong, did have some all-star teams, but had a good NBA career, a solid NBA career. Nets, Nuggets bounced around. But even a guy like Kenyon, who a lot better than Nolo Kennedy and Bennett, but certainly with these number 1 overall picks, unless your name is LeBron James, or in this case, maybe Victor Wembanyama, and not to say that they're all fast track, 10-time NBA All-Stars, All-NBA teams, and future Hall of Famers, but you do have the flip side of that, and does Richache, which profile is he going to fit? That remains to be seen. So you had that. Zach Edey, a lot of people thought that was a reach at 9 by the Memphis Grizzlies, and how I look at it was, to me, a 2-time All-American, a guy that has ability, and even with his size, 7'3", as we've seen here, especially over this past year, making it all the way to the championship game against UConn. And yes, he is raw. Yes, he does have ability. Memphis, they feel like they got the pick of the draft, considering a guy that could certainly complement Jaren Jackson there on that front court. And we understand the NBA isn't played the way it was 20, 30 years ago, but still a guy that can defend, rebound, has a little bit of an offensive game. And with John Morant, and they have a little bit of a nucleus there, who knows if Edey is a guy that could be a big part of that front court and a big part of that team, not just this upcoming year, but also in years to come. So I thought that was a very good pickup for Memphis, and I get it. Maybe a lot of people thought he could have been in the teens, maybe even later than that. And I get it. People are going to underestimate, even with him being an All-America, but he's not going to be ready for the pros. The pros is a whole different deal altogether, and I get that. But maybe Edey will take that as fuel and look at that as some motivation going into this offseason. And obviously with the Summer League about to be played a couple of weeks in Vegas, maybe he could make his claim and stake his claim as a guy that will be able to use that and take that into his rookie season for a big year. And not to say he's going to average 20 and 15, but if you're Edey, hopefully that will bode well for you and maybe doubt all the naysayers as far as him being drafted that high there by the Memphis Grizzlies. But other than that, the other kid from France, Alexander Sarr, went to the Wizards as they're looking to rebuild. Reed Shepherd goes to Kentucky, or was from Kentucky, of course. The shooting guard, member of the Rockets. I'm not going to go through every pick here. Stephon Castle of the championship Huskies goes to the San Antonio Spurs, and then they also drafted Rob Dillingham, which was Reed Shepherd's teammate there at Kentucky. So they got themselves a backcourt there to go along with Wembanyama there for next season and beyond. Donovan Clingan, the 7'2" center from UConn, he goes to Portland, so it gives them some size and obviously some experience knowing what it takes to win. I get at college level, but sometimes that could translate, knowing what it takes to bring that college experience into the pros. Other than that, I know after Edey, Cody Williams, the brother of Jalen Williams on the OKC Thunder, gets drafted by the Utah Jazz. Later on, Devin Carter, Sacramento Kings. His father was Anthony Carter, longtime NBA player from Providence here, not too far in the Big East, up in Rhode Island. And other guys, Dalton Knecht. Lakers went big on that one because Knecht, as we all know, All-American, Tennessee, big-time scorer. Lakers need shooting in the worst way, so Knecht, I think that was a very good fit for Knecht to land there in LA. So that's one that a lot of people are going to have on their radar, especially with the Summer League and going into next year, to complement LeBron, and they're going to need some shooting there. Not to say that they're going to ask Knecht to be the guy to all of a sudden step in and average anywhere between 14 to 18 points a game, but with some nurturing, coaching, etc., and with JJ Redick there, he's the perfect guy to bring Knecht along, knowing Redick and what he's done in his college career and being the sharpshooter that he was in the NBA. So I think that Knecht could certainly pick Redick's brain and definitely get himself into good shape, come off screens, drain threes, things of that nature. So that could be a marriage made in heaven for Knecht. And then as you go on down toward the bottom of the draft, I know the Knicks had back-to-back picks. Keyshawn George, and the Knicks are going to be a big team here, which I'll get to in a minute. Left a little bit of suspense with that trade. But for the Knicks, Keyshawn George and another kid from France, Pacome Dadier. I don't know these guys. I know George played in Miami, and of course they've had success down there of recent years. Shooting guard, and Dadier, I don't know. I couldn't tell you anything about him considering he played overseas. And the big risk there by the Wolves, Terrence Shannon Jr. from Illinois. He had that rape charge that was over his head heading into the tournament, as Illinois looked like they could have been a threat in the tournament to maybe get to a Final Four. And Shannon to go along with Anthony Edwards if he's going to be of any note in that backcourt, with Michael Conley getting older. And who knows how much more he's going to stick around. Now, Shannon is pretty much a prototype of an Anthony Edwards type, but who knows? Maybe Anthony Edwards will be the point guard. Maybe you have a quick backcourt with Shannon and Edwards. That remains to be seen, where Chris Finch, the coach of the T-Wolves, got a 4-year extension, so kudos to him. But Shannon, they're taking a flyer on him. Obviously dropped deep in the draft at 27, considering what happened there off the court. So who knows? Maybe that's something that he'll use as motivation, knowing that he could have been maybe a lottery pick. And for Shannon to see if he could not necessarily mend fences, because he was not charged. And even though the background checks on Shannon came back clean, whether it was from Illinois, whether it was from other points, whether it was from high school to other colleges, etc. So let's see how that pans out. And then you had the Celtics, who picked at 30, of course, them being the defending champs, picked Baylor Shireman from Creighton, Big East player, shooting guard, has not much size. He's 6'4.5", but who knows? He's another guy that can shoot the three. And of course, that's the way the Celtics play. Is he going to even get into the rotation as a guy with Peyton Pritchard there as the guy that's going to come off the bench? So who knows? Maybe they're going to stash him, play in the G League, and maybe 2-3 years down the line could be a part of the team. So that's what you have in the first round. But of course, the intrigue is going to be in the second round later today. Or by the time you hear this, it'll come and gone. But for Bronny James, I talked about this on the YouTube channel a little bit there on Monday. I would think he's going to be a part of this second round. Would I be shocked if he doesn't get drafted? I can't say I would be, because Bronny James, as we know, even though coming off of the scare there with the cardiac arrest and only averaging 4 points a game at USC there last year, but the Lakers, they're going to be up at the 55th pick there, which will be 25th overall, and there's only 28 picks there in the second round, and it's the second and final round of the draft. And I would think that Bronny James is going to be there. I don't know if any teams ahead of them are going to do any favors. If there's a team that's ahead of them and may want to take a chance on Bronny James, that'll be interesting to see whether or not, if they're going to take a flyer on LeBron James' son. And then will the Lakers even think to move up? Let's say if it's the 51st pick, and let me see 52 down. Golden State, Detroit, Boston is right ahead of them. Will Boston even think? Will the ghost of Red Auerbach somewhere in the heavens may even think, it's like, you know what? Let's throw a Jedi mind trick to the Laker franchise and draft Bronny James. Who knows? So it'll be interesting to see whether or not Rob Pelinka may have to move up a spot or two. If the rumor mill says that Bronny James could be coming east to be a member of the Celtics, could you imagine that? So all that is going to transpire here over the course of this afternoon. And as far as guys that are left, guys that could be there, taken there in the second round, as I'm trying to pull this up here. Of course, I don't have the NBA drafting in front of me because I got to start clicking around here, so my apologies there. Guys like Kyle Filipowski, the Duke player, I know that's one that could be the best available, so who knows if anybody's going to take a chance on him. I would think he's going to get drafted probably at the top of the second round. Johnny Furphy from Kansas, Tyler Kolek from Marquette. Those are guys there that are flirting with the top of the second round. You also have a guy like Cam Spencer from UConn, who obviously had won a national championship. Jamal Shedd from Houston, obviously their team was at the top of the polls there, and of course was the number one seed going into the tournament. Remember, he turned his ankle there in that, I believe it was in the regional semi, if not a regional final. I think it was a regional semi where he didn't come out of that game alive, or their team didn't come out of it alive, and Shedd was a guy that was hurt and was a big part of their team. So who knows if anybody's going to take a chance on him. Those are the guys that to me are of note here in the second round, so we'll keep an eye on that. But the big news of the last couple of days, and will lead into free agency this coming weekend and into next week, and you kind of wonder whether you're going to see a few more deals take place where possible trades or things of that nature. I know that there's been rumors about Houston and the Phoenix Suns making a trade, and before I even get to that, the Knicks made a deal yesterday bringing in Mikal Bridges, really Tuesday night, from the Brooklyn Nets, where the Nets are just trying to procure draft picks. And we get it that the Knicks, that's going to be a draft pick in the 20s. And even with the trade that they made with the Phoenix Suns for Kevin Durant last year, and they're going to get the Phoenix Suns picks with a bunch of pick swaps and things of that nature as they look to revamp and just overhaul their team. And even though they signed Nick Claxton to a 4-year, $100 million deal, they got to keep somebody. And remember, Ben Simmons, I know he's not even worth a bag of basketballs, but he is going into the final year of his deal. So I would think Ben Simmons, he's going to try to be as healthy as possible. And although the Nets are not going to trade him now because he's going to be of no worth, but just keep this in mind, if Simmons comes back healthy and he's playing close to what he once was in the early heyday of his Sixer playing days when he was a top defensive guard and was an all-star, where if he has that big first half, you know that he's going to be dangled there at the trade deadline right before the all-star break come next February, and the Nets will certainly send him packing for whatever it is that they could get for the one-time all-star. But with all that being said, I thought the Nets, I'm not going to say they got a steal because with draft picks you never know, but boy, they fleeced the Knicks for 5 draft picks. Mikal Bridges is not Kevin Durant. Mikal Bridges is a guy that is a good player, nice player, can score, can defend, etc. But it wasn't as if they traded for a guy that is a perennial all-star, is a lock all-NBA player, and for the Nets to get all those draft picks from the Knicks. And I know the Nets got a boatload of draft picks themselves throughout their various trades over the years, but for Mikal Bridges, and I get it, it reunites them with the Villanova Knicks of Josh Hart, Jalen Brunson, and Dante DiVincenzo. But again, this isn't to knock Mikal Bridges by any stretch. When they made the trade with the Brooklyn Nets, I believe during that final 2-month stretch, or maybe 6 weeks, he averaged about 26 points a game and certainly made an impact on a net team where a lot of people thought that he was going to be the part of a franchise moving forward post Kyrie and KD. But now, a year and a half later, they trade him and they get 5 picks in return. If you're Sean Marks, you have to make that trade. And who knows where the Knicks will be in 5-6 years. I believe they could swap, or they have the 4 unprotected picks starting next year. So they have 25, 27, 29, and 31. Where the Knicks will be in 2031, nobody knows. And if they have any luck, similar to the Boston Celtics, when the Celtics made that trade, KG, Paul Pierce in 2013, where they got the Nets 2016 number 1 pick, and then they also got the 2017 pick. And we all know that turned into Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. So they're hoping to get that type of luck this time around, with the Knicks and even with the Phoenix Suns for that matter. So I understand why they did it. But the Knicks and the fans, I get it. Stephen A is crazy, and I haven't really seen what Spike Lee has done. But the Knicks fans that I know, we're going to the finals next year. We're going to run it back. Villanova Knicks, blah, blah, blah. Wait, time out. Mikal Bridges is not Kevin Durant. Mikal Bridges is not a top 10 All-NBA player. He is not a guy that is going to take you to the promised land. Yes, does it make you better? Yes. Is he a guy that certainly is going to fit in? And then they also paying OG Anunoby, and I'll get to that in a second. And yes, what the Knicks are building here, of course, it looks like they're going to be definitely in contention, not only for next year, but also for the year after that. And certainly they were a 2 seed this year. Granted, they got the break of all time where Milwaukee fell from 2 to 4 based on the final game of the season where they didn't even care, or 2 to 3 that was. And they got the home court. So let's pump the brakes here on Mikal Bridges being the final piece of this Knick puzzle in order for them to overtake the Celtics in the East next year. Because Bridges, one more time, good player, solid player, does have intangibles, defense, etc. And even wanted to play for the Knicks and get together with his buddies. But I got news for you. If the Knicks somehow falter in the second round, and granted they had all the injuries this year against Indiana, but let's say they go up against a Buck team in the second round and they lose a heartbreaking 7-game series. Is Tom Thibodeau out and they're going to bring in Jay Wright next year? And now you're really going to have the Villanova Knicks. So I don't want to hear it, Knick fans. You could pump your chest out and you could break out the blue and orange pom-poms and talk about orange and blue skies all you want, but it makes you better, yes. But you're certainly not going to overtake the Celtics unless you bring in another big piece and a big-time scorer to complement that. And then another thing that gets kind of lost in the shuffle here is Julius Randle. Now, I don't think he's going to go anywhere, but remember, when Julius Randle has the ball, it's like the offense goes into a clogged toilet because he just wants the ball. He's going to try to ISO and play make and try to shoot the ball, etc. And remember, he hadn't played with the Knicks from January on, and I'm sure they're going to slide him in there and fit him in as well. But I would not be surprised if Leon Rose, Worldwide West, and the front office of the Knicks, they decide to trade him because they just signed OG Anunoby to a 5-year, $212 million deal, which was outrageous. And this isn't a knock Anunoby. He's a good two-way player, solid, can make threes, defend, has length. He's the body that you need in order to beat the Celtics. But the guy has not stayed healthy. What happened when that trade from the Raptors to the Knicks, when they sent RJ Barrett and Emmanuel quickly north of the border? You didn't see him for the last part of the regular season and most of the postseason. And yeah, he did contribute in his own way in the Pacers series before leaving with a hamstring, and even with the Sixers series as well. But the guy can't stay healthy. Just look at his recent track record of him being in the lineup to him being out. So you're going to pay this guy $40+ million a year for what, half a season? Or who knows what you're going to get. Now, he's got the money, and now we're going to have to wait and see whether or not he's going to be all in on his health, on his just being able to take care of his body. And I'm not trying to say he doesn't or anything like that, but with that contract and what he's going to make, he's got to play minimum 65 games. And I get it. Win an NBA, load management. All right, so fine. 65 games to play all the playoff games. I don't want to hear, I got hangnail, I got a issue with my left eyebrow. No. That goes by the board now. You got paid handsomely, and that means bye-bye in all likelihood to Isaiah Hartenstein, which I think is going to be a big loss for the Knicks. So no matter how you slice it with Randle and with Anunoby, and I get they're two different players, but Randle's a guy that could certainly be a me guy. He'd be like, no, I want the ball. The Villanova Knicks are getting all the pub. What about me? I was here before everybody else was on this team, so on and so forth. I don't know. Maybe he checks his ego at the door. I'm not saying Randle is that type of guy. But when he does have the ball in his hands, he wants to ISO. He wants to create. He wants to do things. And with the Knicks and what we've seen here, especially with the Villanova Knicks and how they've been able to coalesce, and we know the camaraderie that those three guys have, and now you're going to bring in Bridges, who pretty much plays the same position. I get it. You could put Randle at the 4, but that's something that a lot of people haven't really discussed. In fact, nobody's discussed. And I'm sure Randle's going to fit in, and I'm sure he's probably going to start the season there, but I would not be surprised paying Anunoby what you did and knowing that you're going to have to give up Hartenstein in the process, that maybe Randle and not being that perfect fit to go along with these 4 guys. And I get it that Josh Hart is a guy that's going to come off the bench where you're going to have DiVincenzo, and he's a guy that could also come off the bench, but he's probably going to start as well. Keep that in mind, people, as receipts. And I would think Randle's going to stay, but I would not be surprised if a sweet deal comes along where they could get Randle out of town, and he's making a pretty penny as well, and to bring back a contract and a player that's going to be more complimentary to this team and to this fit and the system, I would not be surprised. So that's something that's gone unnoticed and nobody's even brought up. Because right away, people are going to think, oh, Randle's just going to fit like a glove. But if you've seen Knick games in the past and you know how Randle plays, and he's a guy that's going to want to get his 20, 25 shots. Well, Brunson, you know he's going to get his. Bridges, he's going to have to get his as well. DiVincenzo, we know he's going to make threes and hit threes. And Anunoby, he's more of a guy that's going to be a glue guy. He's not about his points. So, and Hart is obviously, he's a Swiss Army knife. So keep that in mind, Knick fans. I'm just putting it out there. So let's just keep that in the back of our minds as we move forward. So now, when it comes to free agency and what's going to happen here, I know a lot of it's going to be Sunday where you're going to see the likes of the Paul Georges of the world. If he's going to go to the Sixers, that's going to be obviously a big thing here as we look ahead to these days. And don't have a bunch of free agents. You don't have a lot of players that you can look at and say, oh, wow, this guy could go here, this guy could go there. Paul George, I know, is the biggest one right now, and I don't have the entire list in front of me, but I would think you're going to see a lot of rumblings. You may even get a trade rumor or two. Who knows, maybe the aforementioned Randle, as these teams try to stockpile, as these teams try to keep up with the Joneses, keep up with the Celtics with their big wings and their shooting depth and their defensive backcourt, and the Knicks, and as well as other teams, especially in the East, they're going to try to do what they can. Pat Riley, I'm sure he has something up his sleeve. They re-signed Bam Adebayo to go along with the 2 years that he has. So they extended him 3 years and $166 million. And I get it. That's the going rate. Same for a guy like Anunoby. They're kind of like quarterbacks. They're going to get paid exorbitant amounts of money. And Adebayo, very good player, solid player, a good number 2, maybe even a 2A player, and not 2-way, 2A as the first letter of the alphabet. But these guys are going to get their money. And Adebayo, very complimentary to go there with Jimmy Butler, and who knows what's going to happen there. So there's going to be a lot of intriguing and fascinating storylines going into this offseason, more so in the East, I think, than the West, because the West is pretty much already, I don't want to say set, and there's going to be some tweaking going along. But how much is Denver going to tweak? And I understand that they need some bench help, considering the guys they lost last year, the Jeff Greens of the world, the Bruce Browns of the world that helped them win a title. And of course, Memphis, now that they have maybe Zach Edey, who knows if that's going to be, not to say he's going to be a huge part of Memphis's success next year, but I'm sure they'll tweak a little bit, but maybe not do anything rash or anything that's going to be too big. And the Lakers, who knows what's going to happen with the Bronny James scenario. I think the West is a little bit more intact than the East because Milwaukee, what's going to happen there? Yes, you have Chris Middleton. We get it with Damian Lillard. Who knows what's going to happen? Is that going to be a one-year experiment and maybe they trade him? He's making a ton of money. Not that that's going to happen, and I'm just throwing that out there to see if that sticks. Not to use that as an aggregate or anything like that, but that first year was not successful, and with the coaches coming in and out, Adrian Griffin, etc., so you have that angle. The Sixers, what are they going to do? Is Paul George going to be the apple of their eye to go along with Tyrese Maxey and as well as Joel Embiid? I would think that's going to be the case. They're going to need to make a splash to kind of keep up with the Celtics, even the Bucks, and now the Knicks for that matter. Do the Pacers, obviously they re-signed Pascal Siakam. What's going to happen there? I would think that they'll probably keep their team the way it is right now unless something comes up the pike. Orlando is young. They're on the rise. Cleveland, who knows what's going to happen there? There are a lot of different options and a lot of different avenues that these teams could go. A lot of them may stay put or tweak here and there, but NBA, free agency, and what's going to happen, I'll recap it all on Monday and pretty much have a lot more to unpack there because right now, we just have to wait and see. Because LeBron James, he's another guy. Come Saturday, he's going to decide whether or not he's going to opt out, and that could be huge depending on where Bronny James goes here in this draft, as we talked about earlier. So that's what we got there with the NBA. Going to be fascinating. I'm going to be on top of it there come Monday, and we'll recap it, at that time. All right, now let me get to the baseballs. I get into the batter's box because other than that, no NFL. I know you had that big upset, I believe, with Croatia beating Portugal there in the Copa America. I wish I could add more to that, people, but of course I can. I'm not invested in that, and I understand I'm going to get myself more a little bit in tune with what's going on there, especially with the other sports outside of that. Right, I am a sports podcast. People say broaden my horizons, as one guy said on my YouTube channel. So you know what? I'm going to do that. And I believe there's a UFC fight. I don't think it's anything of magnitude, maybe to the die-in-the-wool UFC fan, but I'll take a look at that over the weekend, maybe recap that as well. But for the baseball, stand back, people. And I'm not going to get crazy. I'm not going to break out my blue and orange pom-poms, and I'm certainly not going to think that, oh my God, this is the turnaround that the Met fan, as I am, has been looking for. But I will say this. Did the Yankee players switch out their uniforms for the Met players here over the last 2 days? Where the Mets scored 21 runs, beating up Garrett Cole and Luis Hill in the process? I couldn't believe my eyes. Here I am on Monday's podcast talking about how I hope the Mets don't get embarrassed. And sadly, that's where it has to come to because the Yankees are still far superior than the Mets. I don't care how you want to slice it, dice it these last 2 games. But think about this. 21 runs, home runs all over the place. Mark Vientos hits 2 the other night off Garrett Cole. You had Harrison Bader in back-to-back games hit home runs. Francisco Alvarez hitting an opposite field home run there last night. I thought the Yankees were in the Met uniforms and vice versa because what I saw at Citi Field the last 2 days, I had to rub my eye. I couldn't believe it. And the Met pitching actually held up. Dave Peterson, he didn't get through 5 innings, which was sad because he only had a 6-0 lead, well 6-1 at the time because he gave up a home run to Juan Soto, but he couldn't get out of that. And think about this, even with Dave Peterson and Sean Manaea, In game one, Dave Peterson had bases loaded, nobody out, got out of that. And Sean Manaea had bases loaded and one out and got out of that. And that must have been a good omen for the Mets and the Met fans and their offense, because they just showed up and really just embarrassed the Yankees. Everything that I thought, or I was not hoping would happen to the Mets, happened to the Yankees. And yes, could I pump my chest out? I am, but I'm not one of those that's going to get in the ear of the Yankee fan on social media, things of that nature. I don't do that. That's not my deal. Yes, this is my platform to talk about it, but to me, it's more out of shock and almost disbelief that the Mets literally put the Yankees through the ringer. And yes, Aaron Judge hit home runs in back-to-back games, and even though I get it, the game was a lot closer there on Tuesday night where he made it 9-7. Aaron Judge hit a grand slam there in the top of the eighth, which made it cosmetically a lot better than it looked, because the Mets had a 6-0 and 9-1 lead in that game. So that game was pretty much over, although you had to, for a second or two, kind of sweat a little bit when Judge did hit that grand slam. But yesterday was no contest, and even though you had a rain delay in the middle of that, but the Mets went going away, and 6-0-2 in the last 8 series. They've been as hot as can be, and I would think that June, which is usually the swoon month for the Mets, as you've seen here over the last half dozen years, 2022 notwithstanding. But I guess they got out of the way in May, but here they are. They are now in their last 21 games, I believe. Think about this, they're 15-6, and they're now at 500. So I guess I have to talk about the Mets being a 500 team, because I said I'm not going to talk about them until they're a 500 team. And here it is, they're a game and a half back of the third wild card spot in the National League. Am I going to get crazy about it here on June 27th? Absolutely not. But I have to give them credit. They've done a phenomenal job here. And Francisco Lindor, since he's been at the leadoff spot, he's been rejuvenated. He was batting 200 there in the early part of June. Now he's at least at 240, which is still not good for a guy that's getting paid $34 million a year. Let's call it as we see it. But batting leadoff has certainly reinvigorated him to the point where he's hit doubles, he's been on base. He's gotten his mojo back, and hopefully that'll continue here as we get into the month of July and beyond. And I'm sure when the calendar turns there on Monday, they're going to think it's June 31st. And when you get to the 4th of July, they're going to look at that as June 34th. Maybe they should do that, because June has just been phenomenal for this Met team. So let's see what happens there. And before I even get to who they play this weekend, which is another team that I pretty much buried even as early as about 10 days ago, and now they're on a come up, and look out for them because they got to 500, and that's the Houston Astros, because the Mets play them this weekend. And the Mets owe them because I believe the Astros last year swept them. The 2 games at Minute Maid, and also I believe the 2 games at Minute Maid, that was 2 years ago, now that I think about it. No, I believe that they played 3 games out at Minute Maid last year. 2 years ago, that was before everybody played each other last year when they took out the unbalanced schedule in the divisions. 2 years ago, the Astros swept the Mets, 2 in Minute Maid, 2 here at Citi Field. And then last year, I believe the Mets salvaged one of those 3 games at Minute Maid. So before I even get to that, I got to talk about the Yankees here. Now they're going to Toronto for 4 games. Toronto seems to be a dead team walking. So who knows if they could get out of this slump. And I'm sure they're looking forward to getting out of June, because this has been the Juan Soto and Aaron Judge show. That's all it's been. Soto hitting a home run there on Tuesday. Judge, as I mentioned, the back-to-back home runs in both games. But they're getting nothing from everybody else. And I get it that Rizzo and Stanton are hurting out of the lineup. But they had to sit Gleyber Torres yesterday as the manager, Aaron Boone, says, I got to give him a blow. I need to get a reset for my second baseman. And I'm going to say this. I've said this a million times. Check those receipts. I'll say it one more time. If Brian Cashman is thinking about giving Gleyber Torres a contract, unless it's going to be a bargain basement contract, but going into a walk year, if he's thinking of resigning him to any type of deal, he's got to get fired. He's off his rocker. And of course, that's not going to be the case. He signed an extension, etc. But if I'm Brian Cashman, I wait the rest of this year out until the season is done, and sayonara. 11 errors in the field. He's batting, 210, 7 home runs. He is far from the player that he was in 2018-19 when he looked like he could have been an MVP candidate. And he is a far cry from that. So their offense is from hunger right now. DJ LeMahieu, I know he's coming back from injury, but he's batting 170. Seriously? And I get it's going to take some time, but he's also a shell from a guy that when he signed with the Yankees was third in the MVP voting and won a batting title. And I believe that was in the pandemic year, but still, he has certainly fallen off a cliff. And when you look at Garrett Cole on Tuesday night, and I get it, it's his second start, but why did he have to dial back his fastball? And I get it, he threw 28 pitches in the first inning where he was throwing about 97, 98. But then in the second, third, fourth innings, he even said that, yes, I took some velocity off. He was throwing in the 90s, where that's why Vientos took him deep and Brandon Nimmo took him deep. He was a shell of his Cy Young self. I don't know how else to put it, but yeah, that was just a bad performance there by Cole, but it's the second start. I'll give him a pass. Let's see what he does in Toronto on regular rest, because he did get an extra day with the day off there on Monday. Let's see what happens in Toronto on Sunday, and then we'll get back to you on Monday. And then Luis Hill had that terrible performance against the Braves on Friday night. Not good yesterday. 4 innings, 4 walks, and in that Cole start, he didn't even strike out a batter, so that goes to show you how his fastball was not on, even in that first inning and beyond. But for Hill, now his ERA, which was under 2, is right at 3. And he certainly doesn't look like the guy that had life on his fastball and his slider, etc., as you saw there in the first couple of months of the year. So Yankees, I would think they're going to bounce back. They haven't won a series. They won 1 series here over the past month. And they've lost 5 of the last 6 series. So let's see what happens with them. But the Astros are a team that, let's face it, at 500, and they're creeping up on the Seattle Mariners in the division, and certainly looking like they're the boogeyman right now, that you're going to have to put a stake through the heart and chop their head off in order to get rid of them. So I would have to look out there, and I may have to eat my words on whether or not that they're a playoff team here in 2024. But right now, they're at 500. They're coming into Citi Field this weekend, which is a low-key good series right now, considering that both teams, all right, they're at 500. Can't get too crazy. And to think, for some teams, they're either at or past the halfway point of the season. The Yankees are now have played 82 games as they're 52-30. And for some teams, the Mets, they're 78. So by the time we get to Monday, they will play exactly 81 games at the halfway point. Again, just goes to show you how fast the year is going. We're already at July 4th there next week, etc., as I mentioned at the top. But the Astros now, and this is the crazy thing about Houston, they don't have Jose Urquidy and Christian Javier. They're done for the season with Tommy John surgery. Justin Verlander is not in the rotation. They've had good performances there from Ronel Blanco, as well as Framber Valdez, who is back in the rotation after being out early this year. And the Astros, even with that whole fiasco with Jose Abreu, having to let go of him, but they are now maybe starting to hit their stride as they approach the halfway point, and them coming into Citi Field this weekend, going to be fascinating. Let's see. We'll get a bird's eye view of how the Astros have turned their season around and see if they can make that push. They're now 3 games behind in the loss, 4.5 behind the Seattle Mariners. And Seattle, they lost 2 out of 3 in Miami. They lost 2 out of 3 in Tampa and have not been good on the road. They're 9 under. Excuse me, they're 6 under. I thought that was a 16-25. They're 6 under, and now they go back home this weekend. They're 27-12, so obviously they play much better in the friendly confines of T-Mobile Park. So for the Astros, let's see if they can get closer to the division leaders. We talked about Texas, as they've been awful here, even after that Max Scherzer start that we saw there on Sunday, where he pitched 5 innings of 1-hit ball, struck out 4, didn't walk a batter. What do? They go to Milwaukee, and they get swept by the Brewers. And now, who's up next on the schedule? They got to go to Baltimore. And even though the Orioles did finally win a game against the Guardians there yesterday, but they had lost 5 in a row going into that game before beating the Guardians 4-2. So baseball now is going to be front and center, people, with the NHL over with. And I get we have the draft and the NBA with free agency and even NHL and all that. I get it. But baseball is going to be the only sport. And once we get past next week, it is going to be Sports Dead Zone Part 2. So just keep that in mind here as we get into the latter part of this month and certainly into the month of July. But as I look at what else is happening in baseball, I know the Guardians, listen, they played well. Do I take them as a serious contender? I have to see it in order to believe it. I get it that they have the best winning percentage in baseball. They don't have the best record because they have games in hand against the Yankees. Orioles, I believe they're even, or maybe the Orioles have a game in hand, or I should say Guardians have a game in hand over the Orioles. But they do have the best winning percentage in the sport, and I get it. They've gotten just performances other than Jose Ramirez, whether your name is Josh Naylor, even his brother Bo, Stephen Kwan, if he doesn't qualify, but he would lead the league in hitting. He's at 385, but he was out of the lineup there for a little bit. And they have some thumpers in the lineup. They have guys that have shown that they could put up some numbers. But come October, that's when I'm going to really believe whether or not the Guardians are a serious World Series contender. Sorry, that's just how I think right now about the team here in the latter part of June. But as we take a look at the schedule this weekend, here's what we got. Obviously, Astros, Mets to keep an eye on. Texas, can they get out of their slump as they'll go to Baltimore? And that's going to be interesting to see how they will perform there on the road. No, I do not want the Texas Rangers schedule. I want the Major League Baseball schedule. Thank you. So, do we have any series that will conclude here? 4-game series. Atlanta at the White Sox, not going to get crazy about that. Yankees in Toronto for 4 games, as I mentioned. Let me just go through the weekend. Texas, Baltimore. San Diego at Boston. Pittsburgh, Atlanta. You don't really have any other. Cleveland, Kansas City, division. Kansas City, I know that they're gasping for air at this point. So maybe that's one I'll have to put on notice. Dodgers, Giants. Who cares? I know the rivalry, etc. Minnesota at Seattle. 2 good teams. So your weekend, I think it's more not a lot of sexy matchups as we've seen in the last few weeks, whether it's Philly at Baltimore, Dodgers, Yankees. You don't have 5-star matchups here as we get into the weekend. But Scherzer going up against the Baltimore Orioles tomorrow. That's one that we'll keep an eye on and see how he fares against the high-powered Baltimore offense. Other than that, people, let's see what we got. Sports, anything news coming down, any news, I should say, coming down the pike before I bid adieu. I don't think that is the case. As I pull up here, nothing much. So that will conclude another episode. Thank you so much for stopping by. Thank you so much for carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, subscribe, rate, and review on all the available platforms, Apple, Spotify, you know the drill. Also, my YouTube channel, at JAYREELZ, subscribe there, like, leave a comment, etc. I always have content going up there and even some lifestyle content, which is coming down the pike here into the month of July and beyond as I try to increase that profile and get to 400 subscribers. I know it's a slog, people, but come on. Help out your boy here, full-time content creator, doing what I love on a day in, day out basis. So your support is heavily needed, and I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. If you haven't done so, if you want to leave a message, comment, suggestion, etc., you could do so on any of my socials at YouTube or on YouTube, of course, at JAYREELZ, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, X, JAYREELZ1, just a number. The old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals. Because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA. As I like to say, talking sports since birth. With nothing but fire, passion, energy, fury, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. For the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South End, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.